Hey there YouTube, it's Leisure Tech coming back at you with another video. Today we're doing things a little bit differently. We're not going to be playing a game. Whenever I first started the channel, I really wanted it to be on a pretty wide area of topics. One of them was going to be movies. With this being the end of October, I figured this was a perfect time to discuss what my favorite horror movies are. Because I have a pretty big list of horror movies that I really enjoy. It was a really hard topic for me to make a list, and to come up with a top 10 list, which is what a lot of people tend to do, was a little bit too challenging for me. There were too many ties in there, too many times where horror movies were just too close for me to rate them. So this is going to be my top 5 horror movies. Now I'm going to get this out of the way. This is my personal top 5 picks for horror movies. Your top 5 or top 10 is going to be completely different. There are going to be things that are left off of this list that a lot of you are going to disagree with. But again, this is my list. These are my rankings. So before you go ballistic on me, I'm just wanting to get that out of the way. Also, there will be spoilers discussed for these movies. So if you don't like spoilers, go away now and come back after you've watched them. But here are my rankings.
Number 5.
Coming in at number 5 is Jaws. Jaws was released in 1975 and directed by Steven Spielberg. Everyone knows Jaws. You see a shark, you think of Jaws. The fact that it's directed by Steven Spielberg, I don't even oftentimes see it as a horror movie. It's just a Steven Spielberg movie. It's just Jaws. It's always been a part of my life. I grew up in the 80s, so whenever I was growing up, Jaws was already a thing that was already just accepted by pop culture. One of the reasons why it's effective is for one of the reasons why they had such a hard time filming it. They had a really hard time with the animatronic shark and getting it to function the way that they wanted to. And this was a big challenge for Steven Spielberg, and he was really frustrated with how the movie was coming along with the production. But in the end, it ultimately was to the movie's benefit, because it was more about what you didn't see and the threat of the shark. There were attacks that happened, but you don't actually see the shark until you're over halfway through the movie, until Brody and Hooper. Quint, who is played by Robert Shaw, is absolutely fantastic, by the way. I love his character. Whenever I was younger, he kind of scared me, but now being a little bit older and a little bit more jaded, I really appreciate his character and his really dark sense of humor. But getting back to the shark, you don't actually see it until they're out in the ocean and they're going to try to catch the shark. And that's whenever Brody has his moment where he snaps up and he says, "You're going to need a bigger boat." It's a really great scene. It's a really effective moment. You hadn't seen the shark until that moment. And then for the rest of the movie, you know what they're up against. It's a really great movie, a lot of great tension. And it with technology being what it is now, and where everybody has everything at their fingertips, looking back on this movie, being a little bit nostalgic about life before the internet, before computers were in everyone's home, when telephones were still hung up on a wall with a 30-foot cord. It's just a really good movie to go back and enjoy, and it's a horror movie that you can watch with the family.
Number 4.
Now, going from a family-friendly horror movie to one that is most definitely not a family-friendly horror movie is the Francis Ford Coppola directed Bram Stoker's Dracula. This movie was released in 1992 and it has a massive cast, huge names. You've got Gary Oldman as Dracula. You've got Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker with a terrible English accent. Winona Ryder as Elizabeth with also a questionable accent. But then you also have Anthony Hopkins, who absolutely loves his time as Van Helsing. It's a great movie, very dark, very gothic, very atmospheric. But even though it's a horror movie, and there's a lot of horrific things that happen in this movie, it is pretty violent. There is a lot of blood. There's a lot of bloodshed. It's pretty over the top. But what Francis Ford Coppola did with this movie was he turned it into a kind of a quasi-love story. By the end of the movie, you feel a bit of a heartbreak for him and for Winona Ryder's character. It's a really good movie. It's very dark, very atmospheric, very violent, and it's just a really good time.
Number 3.
Number 3 on my list is A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors. Now, this came out in 1987. The story was by Wes Craven, but it was actually directed by Chuck Russell. This was the first time where you started to see Freddy have a bit of a dark humor. The first Nightmare on Elm Street really kind of set the stage, changed a lot of what you expected from a slasher flick. The second one kind of veered off, and the second Nightmare on Elm Street movie actually has a number of problems, and there's actually been a lot of talk about what Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is actually an allegory for. You can go and look that up on the internet. I don't need to cover that here. But I personally, I love the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I love all the movies. But the one that I always go back to and I watch every Halloween is Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. As Patricia Arquette in one of her first roles, might actually be her first. Then the character of Nancy actually returns from her role in the first one, and she's kind of a mental health expert trying to help kids that are in a mental health hospital, trying to help them through some issues when Freddy, played wonderfully by Robert Englund as always, comes and haunts them during their dreams. What makes Nightmare on Elm Street as a series and Freddy as a movie monster so effective is the fact that he comes and he takes over your nightmares. You know, we're the most vulnerable when we're sleeping. And the fact that you have no control over your dreams and you can die whenever you're in your sleep. It's very scary stuff. It's a very scary topic, especially whenever you know and realize who Freddy is, what he was in life before he was dead. He's a very effective villain, and in this movie, whenever he starts to show not just that horrific side of him, but also the dark humor, it adds a sense of a bit of a lightness during a lot of the horrific scenes, and it just makes it for a really enjoyable, fun ride.
Number 2.
Number 2 on my list is 2010's Insidious. Insidious was directed by James Wan, and it came out at a time whenever horror movies were really kind of getting a little bit stale. Paranormal Activity came out a few years prior, and that really kind of started a trend of just a bunch of found footage horror movies. Everything that was coming out was found footage, and it was met with kind of diminishing returns. The first Paranormal Activity is great. It's actually in my top 10, but again, there's so many that tie, it was hard for me to rank. But Insidious, James Wan, he wanted to set out and direct an old school, classic ghost haunting type of story, and he was very effective in it. This stars Patrick Wilson as the father. He is a personal favorite actor of mine. Every time he's in something, I tend to watch it. He's had a bit of a horror trope lately with, you know, the Insidious franchise and also the Conjuring franchise, but where I started to latch on to him was in the movie The Watchmen that was directed by Zack Snyder. I thought he was great in that movie, and he's been pretty much fantastic in everything he has been in. He helps bring some levity to the role, he helps keep the movie grounded, and he helps really drive the movie while he's out looking for his son, taking charge, and he goes into the in-between. Plus, it's got a great demon. The demon that is in the movie that haunts the child and wants to take the child over. I mean, he looks exactly like Darth Maul, but again, the best thing about The Phantom Menace is Darth Maul. So you recreate that, you put it in a horror movie, it's a match made in heaven. It's a really great movie. The ending is fantastic. Up right until the very end, you do see the twist coming, and it's a great way to end the movie. Sets up the second movie really well. Second movie, not quite as good as the first. Again, you have the law of diminishing returns as the series continues, but still, the Insidious franchise has been a really good horror series, and I'm really looking forward to the next Insidious movie to come out.
Number 1.
Number 1 horror movie on my list is 1973's The Exorcist. The Exorcist was directed by William Friedkin. I apologize if I've just butchered his last name. But the story was by William Peter Blatty. This movie stars Linda Blair in her infamous role as Regan, the girl who becomes possessed by the demon Pazuzu. It's a slow burn of a movie. It doesn't start off immediately with the horrors. There are some bumps in the night things that happen, and even whenever Regan initially becomes possessed, there are some creepy things that happen, but the movie doesn't really start to ramp up the horror until you're more than halfway through the movie. The acting in the movie isn't necessarily the best across the board, but Linda Blair and her role of being possessed by the demon is the driving force behind the movie. And the last half of the movie, especially whenever both priests are there to start the rite of the exorcism on Reagan, who is possessed by Pazuzu, the movie really kicks it into overdrive, and the horrors just come nonstop. The entire exorcism scene is one of the most intense scenes I've ever seen in television. I had never seen The Exorcist until I was already a grown adult. I was 18 years old, still living with my parents, and it came on a Sunday afternoon on regular TV. So I saw this in the afternoon on regular TV with commercials, and since it was on regular TV, that means all of the best parts were edited out. And that movie scared the shit out of me. I had to sleep with my lights on for a solid week. Now, my father will say the same thing, that he just refuses to watch the movie at all anymore. I happen to love horror movies, but he would say that he would watch the movie each time expecting that it wouldn't scare him again, and he was wrong. I'm the same way. I go back, I watch the movie, I'm thinking, there's no way in hell it's going to scare me this time. I've already seen it 20 times. How could it possibly scare me? But there's just something about it. It's a scary movie. What can I say? It freaks me out. It freaks a lot of people out. And especially the end scene where Father Karras comes back into the room and he sees the other priest dead on the floor. And Reagan, who had been restrained this whole time, just sitting there at the edge of the bed, giggling, with just the dead eyes, sitting there like a little girl giggling. Where it's the demon that is giggling at what it had done, and it had finally conquered the priest and killed him. Just something about that, the tone, the mood of the room. The score had completely stopped by that point. There's very little ambient sound, just a little bit of sound of wind coming through. That scene scares the shit out of me every time I see it. There's no other way to say it. So The Exorcist, definitely my number one horror movie. Now, I know movies like The Shining, or Aliens, Friday the 13th, a lot of you are going to be surprised that they're not on this list. Some of them are in my top 10, some of them aren't. But again, this is my list, so feel free to hit me up in the comments below and tell me how wrong I am, and tell me what your top 5 horror movies are. So this has been The Leisure Tech. Thank you for coming along and watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to click like, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Alright everyone, see you next time.